All right, looks like we're live. I think. There might be a little bit of a delay. All right, good people. I am trying my hand here at streaming, and it's a little bit scary because what's actually happening is I'm doing this in my garage, so production quality is not the greatest. And I just got out of the water from surfing, so I don't look the prettiest either. But hopefully you'll bear with me here while I sit here and do a little overclocking with you. And so my plan today is to get a little bit of overclocking done. And what we're going to be doing is try my hand at overclocking these things. Intel Xeon processors. All right. So this is a very big boy. This is an Intel Xeon processor. And it's not unlocked. It's locked. It's a 10-core, 20-thread Xeon processor, and I'm going to walk through the steps of how I'm overclocking this thing, so that you guys can maybe try your hand at it too. So first things first, I've got this thing set up to stock, and so if we look at some of the tools that we've got to tell us how this thing performs, we're going to use some of these basic tools like CPU-Z, right? And CPU-Z will show us that it's got a boost clock of 33 megahertz, and it's got a base clock of, I'm sorry, not 33 megahertz, 3.3 gigahertz, and a base clock of 2.5 gigahertz. And it's 10 core, 20 thread. Memory is running in quad channel RAM. So this is a nice, healthy little setup. The board that we're using is the X79 Intel board with an Ivy Bridge E chipset. So that's what we're running. And yeah, other thing we're going to want to look at and have launch most of the time is a program called Hardware Monitor. And Hardware Monitor is going to run and show us some of the kind of specifics of how this processor works. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time if this thing is uglier than sin. It's because we're having to run this thing in a high contrast mode because it just looks horrible when it's not in high contrast mode. So we've got 10 cores, starting with core 0, right, and ending up in core 9, which makes for 10 cores, 20 threads. Let's see, it's got quite a bit of virtual memory, physical memory, cache, all that stuff. But basically this is a pretty slow server processor that is not meant to be overclocked. We are going to overclock it. You may be asking yourself why. 10 cores, 20 threads, why not? There's really no reason not to. So what I'm going to do next is, this is completely stock with a base clock of 2.5 gigahertz, but a boost clock of 3.3 gigahertz, right? And so I'm going to take this guy and we're going to boot into BIOS. Meanwhile, I may set this up so you guys can see what the rig looks like, because I have this thing in a case right now, and I'm using a basic AIO all-in-one, and we're going to hear this thing beep pretty soon, hopefully. I did hit reboot, didn't I? And I want it to reboot so I can hit beep and get into BIOS. Or maybe it's completely asleep. I don't know. So you guys can see what the setup looks like. It's always when you go live that, you know, things kind of go wrong. But let's take a look here at what this setup looks like first. Oh. Of course, that was going to happen. My lamp was going to fall and eat it. See, can you guys see that? That's the setup. It's in a nice little Lian Li case. It's an X79 board. I'm going to power it up because it went completely to sleep. Using an Let's see if the lighting can get a little bit better. I'm using an AIO cooler in there right now, and with a 50 millimeter thick by 120 board, or AIO. Here, let's see what that guy looks like. So that's what that guy looks like. We're using a RX 580 for the video card, quad channel RAM, X79 Sabertooth, 750 watt power supply, running an SSD. So we're going to get back to it here and start messing around with BIOS. So let's get back to where we were here. And fix our little in-stream feed. Let's get our lights back on here. So now we're in BIOS, right? Using the optimized defaults for the thing. You can see that XMP is disabled right now. If we're going to run some benchmark stock, we at least probably want to see what it looks like with XMP turned on. So XMP enabled, it's reading the quad channel RAM that we have as DDR3 1600, which is, you know, kind of exactly what it is. So DDR3 1600 RAM. What's next? We're idling at 42 degrees Celsius. That's not bad. So let's go in here. Let's save this, boot into Windows, and let's run a benchmark. Hope I don't bore you guys too much with all these reboots, but if you want to know how to overclock a locked Xeon and get the most performance out of it, then you can. Might as well go through all the little steps. I should have turned that off to begin with, just so that it's not an annoyance. I keep looking at my studio feed here, which has a delay, versus actually looking at my monitor where it's running, which is what I should be looking at. Hopefully our tools are going to launch here so we can see what's going on. I'm going to do a Control-Alt-Delete so that I can get Task Manager running and we can see a different way of measuring performance. So there's a couple different benchmarks that we can run. A lot of people give CPU-Z's benchmarks a hard time, but I actually think it's a pretty good benchmark. I don't think it's that bad at all. When I've actually run this thing so many times and I've compared with a lot of different applications out there. So let's start by doing a couple benchmarks to see what the numbers look like, right? So if I sit here and I run bench CPU, you can see here that it's using up all the processor cores right now. I do want to have hardware monitor up too. So if we look at the summary, in stock trim, which is 3.3 gigahertz boost, 2.5 gigahertz base, right there, 2.5 gigahertz base, which is what we're running. Actually, it doesn't even boost in that base stock clock. That's why the numbers are so low. That's why you want to have your telemetry software up all the time, because then you know whether or not you got some settings right or wrong. So this thing wasn't even hitting the boost clock, right? So that's why right now the single core processor number is what it is. It's 259, which is relatively low for single core. That's 1 out of 10 processors. let's see here, 3172. So let's remember those numbers. I don't really want to do any more benchmarks at this point until we have the boost clock turned on. So let's do another reboot here. Get into BIOS. And what I'm going to have to do is sit here and pretty much hit delete. Once you hear that beep, just keep hitting delete. F7 gets us in advanced mode. If I look at what we're looking at here under AI Tweaker, yes, we've got the XMP turned on. But right now, when it says sync all cores, you don't always want that for core ratio, because then you're not going to be able to hit boost. So, and there's a couple places where you want to do that. If I go into CPU power settings, turbo mode is disabled. Duh. Want to turn that on, leave everything on auto. Get back over here under advanced. Is it advanced? CPU configuration. CPU power management, turbo enabled, yes. Okay, so now we're going to hit F10, hit yes on there, and take a look. So now, I'm wondering if I can apply one of these filters that filters or effects, so that we can take notes here as we go along. I'm trying to see if there's some kind of filter tool I can apply here while I'm live with you guys. Let's see. Task Manager, there you are. All right, let's run our CPU ID here again. And let's also run our hardware monitor. Pull that over to the side, run it. It says that the multiplier max is 33, right? So, here we go. We're going higher than the 2.5 gigahertz base. Let's see if the benchmark numbers are higher this time. Once I hit bench CPU, then we'll have a base clock here that we can compare against. It's kind of interesting though, because all core, it's going to 2.9 gigahertz all core compared to what it was. So yeah, if you look, our single core number here has been increased significantly, right? 318 versus the something that we had in the 200s before. I don't remember if this number went up too, but we'll have to see. So now we want to go into the first overclocks. So we're going to go in. Well, this is the base. We probably want to run another type of benchmark, right, to measure this. But I don't want to run anything that takes forever. Let's see what we could do. Let's see if we can run the latest version of Linpack here. It's also going to tell us whether or not we're stable when we're sitting here doing overclocks. So this is Linpack. It's not like IBT. It's not as pretty. We're going to do a benchmark. We're going to do standard, or let's do a quick 2 gigabyte. Instead, we'll run it 5 times. We just want to see how many gigaflops we're producing at the base clock, at the base setting here. And we want to see how good of a calculation machine this thing is at this point, right? So it'll run, do its thing, and we'll see how long that takes. Meanwhile, do I have anything here I can do here for doing captions? So I can write down some of these settings as I am streaming live here. What are we doing? Its first run is up. It says it's doing 186 gigaflops. So 186 gigaflops is not bad at all, my friends. Not bad at all. That's using the most current version of Linpack. It's probably a much lower number when you use something like IBT, which is what's used in the older processors, like back in Haswell times. Although this is Ivy Bridge, so this is quite a ways back. It's not even Devil's Canyon anymore, so we'll see. 187 gigaflops. That is not bad at all, my friends. While it's running that test, let's go to the CPU tab here and see what it's doing. It's doing it at 2.9 gigahertz. I thought the base clock, on this thing was 2.5 gigahertz. We'll have to look it up here in a second and see what it says on ARK for this processor, because I swear the base clock on this thing was 2.5 gigahertz. I could be wrong. Could be absolutely wrong. So 187 gigaflops is what we're looking at, right? Let's remember that number. I think it's going to go quite a bit higher. So right now we're able to get to a 3.3 turbo boost, but the base clock's acting like it's somewhere around. Let's take a look here. This base clock is acting like it's not going any lower than 2.9, right? Here's the minimum, 2.9. Huh. And it's only using 0.95 volts. I'm going to get back into BIOS, reboot it, run these numbers again. So this is, let's see, I want to show, well, before we do that, let's just see if we can get Chrome. This is the Xeon 70 V2. All right, ARK is where Intel tells you everything that has to do with their processors. It's a server type CPU. You can run maximum of max CPU configuration, 2 CPUs maximum. Let's see here, which is why it says 2S only. But this was an impressive CPU in its time. So Turbo Boost 2.0, 3.3 gigahertz it says. Processor base frequency 2.5 gigahertz. Huh. Why is it doing it at 2.9? I am a little bit perplexed here. 22 nanometer process, launched back in 2013. This is basically the processor. There's hundreds of these ran on the internet. It was $1,550 when it was new. You want to blow your mind and guys see what I bought it for? Let's see here. 2670. Oops, come on. 70 V2. That's kind of about what I paid for it. Was $89.99. So not bad. 10 core, 20 thread for $89.99. This X79 board on eBay. That's kind of the expensive part. Let's see here. Asus X79 motherboard. Yeah, people want a lot of money for these things. Although a PX79 is 99 bucks, not a bad board. People want 175 bucks for this X79 board, so I don't know if I want to get rid of it quite yet. I want to overclock quite a few different Xeons before I get to that point. Ooh, look, 232. Am I going to get 232 back for this thing? We'll see. Let's get out of eBay. Let's reboot this thing. So it's a little bit of a mystery why it's running at a 2.9 base clock instead of the 2.5 base clock. I don't know. Maybe this Xeon wasn't meant to go running around in a motherboard like this, but now that it is, it kind of doesn't know where it is. So I'm Rebooting. Got to sit here, wait for the beep, so I can just hit delete till my life is over. There we go. This is the normal F7. Get in advanced mode. So, what do you do when you have a locked Xeon? What does it mean to have a locked Xeon? So when you don't have a locked Xeon or a locked processor, usually in Intel terms, it's going to be a K-type processor, right? So it's unlocked. The RAM is never really locked, so you can always mess around with RAM or do the XMP profile. Usually what would happen is right here under core ratio, see where it says auto? If I hit that, I would have an option to change what the ratio would be. It'd say that I could put the ratio to 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever it might be. Some unlocked processors, they're not really fully unlocked. They just have a maximum ratio that they can run. This thing has a maximum ratio, which is 33. But since it's fully locked, I can't even do anything under 33. I can't say 30, I can't say 31, I can't say 32. It just kind of is what it is. So, what are your options? If you can't change the core, what are you going to do? Well, the only thing you can do is change the what's known as the B clock frequency, right? And the B clock frequency is basically what the base clock frequency is that everything in the system is running. It's the bus frequency. So you want to start small. I've already gotten this thing where I needed to get to, but so usually what you want to do is you want to hit the plus button. I don't know if you want to try that small of an increment, because if you look up here, it'll give you kind of a prediction of what the speed's going to be, right? So if I do a minus sign, 1600. If I do a plus sign, 1602. It's only 2 megahertz at a time. That's a pain in the ass. So I am going to just type in 104. And we're going to see if 104 boots into the system right now. There's a lot of other adjustments you can do. Let's see if it boots into 105. F10, save it. Yes. Let's see if this thing boots. If it doesn't boot, what it's going to do is it's going to turn off, hate on me. But if it does boot, it's just going to beep right away on the first try. Like that. It took it. Let's get back into BIOS. F7. So it should have taken that. Oh yeah. So it's letting me boot into 3.4 gigahertz, so 100 megahertz higher than it was before. The thing you got to be careful of too is once you start upping the B clock, right, everything goes up. So you see that the DRAM speed here has gone up. DRAM is the thing that's not going to let you boot in at higher clocks and higher B clocks. So we want to, as you up the B clock, the RAM's going to go up too. So what we want to do is we want to go to a lower B clock. We want to go to lower RAM so that we're able to sit here and boot into Windows. Now, one irritating thing is every time you change anything to do with RAM, it goes to sync all cores, which I don't want. I want it to go to auto. This RAM can take 1600, so we want to always be under 1600. Otherwise, you're going to get instability issues. Save this guy. Go back in here. We're 100 megahertz faster right now on this thing. I sort of screwed up too because this processor, 10 core, 20 thread, has a maximum of boost of 3.3 gigahertz. I should have done a little bit more homework and picked up the one that has a maximum boost frequency of 3.6. There are some in the 10 core range that will do 3.6, 3.9 that will fit in the socket on this computer. So now we're gonna boot this guy up. Let's see what launches here. We'll do a little bit of static benchmarks here. And See what kind of numbers we can get. Oh, you know what? I messed up. Because the max frequency that it's hitting right now is 2.6 again, because every time you change one of those settings, like the XMP settings or the RAM, it turns boost off. So you got to go back into the BIOS and make sure that that's turned on. So if I bench the CPU right now, number's the same, 31, 2.6. There's no boosting right now. So we know that the all-core benchmark number we had before is the same. It was 3200, 31. We're back in the 270s because we don't have our boost clock working out, right? So we got to go back in because we got to learn our lesson. That's basically how this whole thing works. So if you noticed last time, the base clock was 2.5, so we were up 100 megahertz now. So we're at 2599. And so when I get back to the later settings, before I spend all this time going 100 megahertz at a time, I'm actually going to just go straight to the highest setting I was able to get this processor to, so we can get to benchmarking. But that's something you got to look out for, is every time you reboot this guy, some things are going to set themselves to default. So why are you not coming on? Ugh. Annoying. Went straight into Windows. I missed it. I just wasn't a fast enough tapper. F7. Let's see if I'm right. Yes, 2600. All right, that's what it was supposed to be. But if I go down here into my CPU settings, turbo disabled. You want to enable that. F10, boot back into Windows. We're going to run this one benchmark and then get back into the max clock we're able to get, and then I'll go through the little settings that you need to do to be able to clock this Xeon the right way, or get it to its maximum clock. So 3179 was kind of a common all-core number on that CPU-Z setup, and 187 gigaflops is, I think, what we were able to get with this thing before. So let's see here. Did I do this right? Oh man, this stream is going for a little bit. Sorry this thing's so long, but overclocking is one of those things that is a lot of trial and error. So, yeah, the base clock is up right now. The base clock is at 3.0 now versus, 2.9 because we upped it by 100 megahertz. So we've got to go in there, for a long-term overclock, you're going to want to save certain things like being able to save some electricity and things like that. But for our purposes right here, let's see here, let's bench it. Oh, that number went up by a lot. Lord, it was 3100 before. We're at an all core of 3.0 now. We're hitting higher boost clocks. But look at that. Single processor numbers up to 334. All processor, all core numbers up to 3807. You can run this same CPU-Z on your computer and see if you're anywhere near this number as well, because it's a pretty good indicator of performance. Actually, let's see what's in this thing. What's in here right now? So if I compare it to a Ryzen 3700X, which I've actually got one of those in my son's rig right now, 5433 for that Ryzen 3700X. $300 processor versus $89 processor. I think we can get that number up a little bit higher. 511 though on that single core number is fairly good. Let's see if we can get see if our Linpack went up any here at all. Do our 1 benchmark, 2 gigabyte, run it 5 times. So up at this point, all I did was change the B clock by 4 megahertz. That's it, which gets multiplied times, the multiplier that the processor runs at. So it's 4 times, let's say the multiplier is at 10, it'd be 400 gigahertz, right? Or, sorry, 400 megahertz. And so every time you up B clock, it changes things. It was 187 before, and now it's saying 168. So actually our gigaflop number went down. That, I've seen this before. It kind of is an anomaly to me. I don't know if it's going into thermal throttling. That's why these telemetry pieces of software are good to have, because it'll tell you whether or not you're in thermal throttle. It says no for everything as far as thermal throttling and all that. So there we go. It was just that first run. These Xeons are a little bit weird sometimes. It's almost like initially when they're overclocked, they kind of see like, I don't know, like they freak out a little bit. But 192. So we were at 187 before. And so we're up 5 gigaflops. It's not bad. I'm interested to see what that number actually is like with the full overclock I was able to get. Ooh, average was 188. But we know we even got a peak of 193 here on gigaflops. 193, 192. Let's call it 192. Picked up 5 gigaflops. I'm going to go back into BIOS, and I'm going to load up a setting that I've had before so that you guys can see how this thing performs in full overclock trim. So now I gotta wait for the beep and tap away, tap. Okay, I'm in here. F7, advanced, boom, 3432, 3.4 gigahertz is the turbo mode that we're seeing. So, a couple things, right? When you're doing B clock, there's a tolerance. So most components, anything that's plugged into your motherboard, by the way, is also getting overclocked. As far as the speed goes that it's communicating at, your PCI bus is getting overclocked, so your GPU's a little bit overclocked on the PCI bus. So you got to be careful with that a little bit. That's why on processors that can take a lot of B clock, they actually have something here called straps, where you can just go straight to 125 B clock. The Xeon will not take that. Okay? So that's why it's not too happy with that. But there's a point where this thing no longer wants to go up in frequency, or no longer wants to go up in B clock. So it's kind of this wall that you hit. And so when you hit that kind of wall, you either got to go down and figure out if it's the RAM that's doing it to you, or if it's something else. So you want to, when you're doing a lot of this overclocking, especially on locked processors, you want to turn off a lot of things. You want to turn off power saving mode. You want to go in here and turn off anything that's power saving related, right? So any of that stuff needs to get turned off. CPU performance settings. You want to turn as much of that stuff as possible. One of the things that's key here on this X79 board is you want to take the CPU spread spectrum, disable it. PCIe spread spectrum, disable it. Those things are going to hold you back from being able to have a higher overclock. The other thing too is there's a setting here. Let's see. If you go in advanced CPU configuration, there is... Somebody also told me that you want to turn off all the virtualization, which I tried for getting into higher clocks, but I don't remember what I ended up at for that scenario. I still want to have C states enabled. I still want to have my Intel Speed Step enabled. Let's see here. I want to, before I start loading up my overclocking profiles, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. So I already have an overclocking profile set up for this 2670 V2, which is number 8. Load from profile, yes. Let's see what this looks like. So this is what I came up with eventually, okay? And how I arrived at the clocks that I have. So let's go back up here to the top. I've got this thing able to have a boost clock of 3.76 gigahertz. So I've been able to get 400 megahertz up from stock. And I've been able to leave so the B clock I was able to get to was 114, but I hit a wall at about 105. And I couldn't go any further until I started tweaking with all the very little settings. I got the DDR3 to drop to a setting of 1520. Power saving mode's disabled. I even went into the DRAM, and this DRAM has a CAS timing of 9. So I loosened up the timings to 12, 12, 12, 36. That made it much more stable for me once I was in Windows. When you go into the Digi Power Control, had to go ultra high on everything, basically to get it to come on. Phase control for the RAM, everything. You basically, there's a point where you're not booting into Windows anymore, or it's not taking. The first step is you got to boot into BIOS, right? And then once BIOS is good and stable, then the motherboard's going to let you go into Windows. If you're not getting past any of that, there's almost always one answer. Voltage. You got to throw more voltage at it within limits. So you got to look up and see what the limit of your processor is. This is an Ivy Bridge E processor. Well, it's not E. It's just Ivy. Well, E. Xeons are E's, I guess. Ivy Bridge processor. So I had to go in there and I had to change a bunch of settings. I went in here and looks like I didn't touch that at the time. Extreme over voltage. I still was able to keep that disabled because I don't want to fry this chip, as much as the chip doesn't really cost a whole lot of money. I don't want to fry it. I was able to add more voltage by using an offset. So an offset means once the processor is under load, then it adds voltage. It's not an always on voltage. You can go in here and you can type in, 1400. Well, you can't do that. Oops. Let's see, what was this? 0.15. There's an option here under voltage where you can go to manual mode. And when you go into manual mode, you can just go in here and type in, whatever you want for voltage, right? 1.4, oops, 1.4, 1.35, whatever it might be. But what I found that worked well with the Xeon was actually doing offset voltage, and was actually the most efficient and stable and power efficient, so it didn't consume too much power. Again, both of these are disabled down here. There was a setting I was trying to find for you guys that was really critical on being able to get this Xeon to boot for me. It must be under advanced settings. I still had virtualization turned on, so that wasn't it. All my processor cores are active, hyper-threading is active, adaptive thermal monitor is active, so that's good. Yeah, everything is still enabled on this thing. So should still be able to boot. Huh. Am I thinking about a different processor? No, sorry, this is it right here. I don't know why I was totally missing it. This right here, clock gen full reset in the X79 for Xeons and B clock overclocking, you got to have it enabled. I hit this wall at like 105 and it wouldn't boot more. It didn't care about the voltage. No matter how much voltage I threw at it, it wouldn't take it until I had clock gen full reset enabled. And if you look at the description on what clock gen full reset is, and that's all wrong. I love how the grammar is on half the stuff. Enable for better overclocking. Disable the skip system shutdown at B clock frequency adjustments. It makes it sound like it's just a setting that makes it easy for you so you don't have to reboot and stuff like that. But generally speaking, I'll tell you, on the whole, it was actually kind of the key for me that got me through being able to continue to overclock the thing. I could go higher than 114. I can hit 115 here, okay? But it took so much voltage to do it, and it was so unstable that it just absolutely wasn't worth it. Now, the cooling that I have on here is an AIO. I'm going to take this motherboard out next time I stream, and I'm going to stick it on a test bench I have that has a semi-custom loop that's going to have better cooling, and we'll see if that'll let me boot into higher frequencies. Once I figure this out, I'm going to get a higher turbo clocked locked Xeon as well. If I can get a locked Xeon that will go into the 4 gigahertz land, 10 cores, 20 threads, I'm going to be very happy, because after that I'm going to get a dual socket 10 core 20 thread, so I can have 20 core 40 thread and see what that does. Alright, so I'm going to save this thing right now instead of gabbing away. We'll boot into Windows, we'll run the benchmarks so you guys can see kind of improvement we have in the benchmarks here. I better check and see if my stream is still actually working. It's still working according to Google, and we're at 42 minutes right now. The ultimate force. It's like this thing that computer people come up with to make dorks feel better about themselves, you know? I mean, they even give you stickers with that ultimate force thing to stick on the outside of your computer. Why? So people that never come visit your house are never going to see it? I don't know. Let's see. Alright. We're back into Windows, ladies and gentlemen. And boom. Isn't it pretty? 10 cores, 20 threads. It's a good thing I learned math. 5 times 4 equals 20. Alright, well, it says the base speed's 2.5. It says it right here in Windows, but 2.99 is what it's constantly running. I don't know what to make of it. Maybe somebody can explain it to me. Somebody on Reddit that knows more than me. Everyone on Reddit knows more than you, by the way. Hate to break it to you. So if you look, because I'm using offset instead of just keying in fixed voltage, I'm able to idle at 0.9 volt. That's like thermally good, you know? So I mean, honestly, most people don't think about it, but you are throwing money down the drain in the form of electricity when, you know, you run way too many watts than you really have to. That's pretty cool. 3.53 is what it's running right this very minute. So it is hitting boost clocks and things like that. So last time, what was our number? We got this thing up to 3,800 and 300 something for the single core. Let's run this benchmark. Boom, ladies and gentlemen. 4200. We're in 4200 land. 10 core, 20 thread, 7-year-old processor. $89 is all this thing costs. There are risks with buying these processors because sometimes you'll get one that doesn't work. Or you get one that's called a confidential unit, which is a sample from Intel that someone's not supposed to sell because theoretically it's Intel's property that they're just letting you borrow. And sometimes they're not right. Like it's 2670, but it only has 8 cores activated. So you got to be careful when you're looking at the listings at actually how many cores they say it has. So I seem to remember our single core was not this high before. This is 359 for single core. That's pretty good. And the all core workload is 4181.9. That's also pretty good. Let's compare it to a 3700X. Yeah, it's pretty far off from a 3700X, but it's a much more modern processor. Let's compare it against one of its Intel brethren. Any Intel brethren we want to compare against? All right, the 5960X processor from Intel was a god-awful expensive processor at the time, okay? And we're beating it with this $89 Xeon. We're like killing it. We've got quad-channel RAM. We've got just as much cache on the processor as that thing, but not paying for... But that's an unlocked processor. I mean, to be fair, they could probably hit 5,000 with that. So that's the CPU Z number. All right, let's see what Linpack says. Linpack. We're going to do the exact same thing we did before. I'm going to run a benchmark, 2 GB standard benchmark, 5 runs. And while that runs, we're going to sit here and look at it. And by the way, this thing is not eating up, because I'm streaming on my laptop, and I'm not eating up resources on the machine here. So all I'm doing is basically stealing the video feed from the graphics card out of it. Do you guys see that number? 210 gigaflops. And that's the first run. Let's see what it does on the run after that. Still 210. It's pretty stable though. Like, it's not blue screening. It's not hating on me. It's running pretty good. Look at this. It's like the Matrix. It's only at 59% processor total though. I could run there's other benchmarks I'm going to run too, because I want to see if we can really get some performance out of this guy. And then I'm going to end the stream because at some point my son's probably going to come running in here and tell me about some thing he saw on TikTok, YouTube, or something else. These young kids, they don't even use Twitter. They think Twitter's crap. YouTube still has cred though. Let's see here. All right. Average of 209. That's not bad. 209 gigaflops. I'll take that. I am not going to be mad about that at all. I am going to leave CPU Z up just so I can see the boost clocks. I'm going to take it out. Let's run something. I'm going to run Cinebench R20 here so you guys can see what it does on R20. R20 is a program that will eat a decent amount of processor when it runs. So we're going to run, the single core is going to take way too long for R20. So I'm going to run the all core here first. I don't know, it's going to take forever. I'm going to have to walk away if I'm running it with other stuff. Okay, R20. I want to know how much voltage it's taking. it's pretty insane. The voltage is still like in the 0.986 range. That's under 1 volt. That's kind of insane. Although I didn't change the CPU limits for current consumption and all of that. I probably should have, because then I could have gotten the TDP up quite a bit higher. But I'm running at 3.3 all core. That was its former boost baseline, right? That was the max it did for boost before. I'm running that as an all core now with a boost to 3.76 gigahertz. That's almost, so for all core, well, it was 2.9, so 400 megahertz higher. But compared to its spec was 2.5 gigahertz, right? And at 3.3, I'm 800 megahertz higher than its base clock for all core. So that's like a free processor almost, in terms of, calculations and stuff. And in terms of boost clock, I'm going up to 3.7, which is 400 megahertz higher. I might have been saying gigahertz a few seconds ago, but I meant megahertz. All right, here's Cinebench R20. It goes pretty fast. I mean, in this whole time I've been rambling, it's been doing its thing. 3057 is the number. I will say that my AMD R5 3600 6-core 12-thread has a number of roughly 4100, but I have that thing overclocked. I have it overclocked to the point that people don't believe me. They think I'm full of crap, but I'm going to stream and you guys will see what I'm talking about. I really don't feel like wasting your time and having it run a single core setup, because that's just going to take too much time. But let's see here. I do want you guys to remember these numbers, okay? 3057. Now I'm going to run something called Time Spy. Time Spy is much more graphics intensive, and I have a crap Polaris RX 580 card in here right now. But let's see what its overall number is that it says it's going to do, because Time Spy is kind of a cool program that a lot of benchmark guys are using nowadays. And if I'm comparing this to the next Xeon I get, or comparing this to the AMDs that I have, I kind of want to have a cross-platform thing to test with. All right, Time Spy, let's run. And if I haven't said it already, I'm running on a SATA 3 SSD, which is pretty fast for boot times. I just wouldn't even use a mechanical drive anymore. But what's really amazing are the M.2 drives that are out there. They're so unbelievably fast. It's crazy. Did I crash it? No. Time Spy's running now. It's loading. I don't really care what the GPU numbers are that come out, because I know that this GPU is old and crap. But what am I gonna do? And just in case anybody want to buy a 4-core 8-thread Intel Extreme from, or is this a museum piece at this point? 4-core 8-thread to me is a museum piece at this point. But this thing does overclock to well over 5 gigahertz. 5.1 gigahertz this thing will do. No? Look for it on eBay. Super duper cheap. Time Spy is taking forever to load. That's cool. There's already tearing going on. God, this thing is like frame choppiness. Yeah, I actually don't play video games. I just like to test machines. So as odd as that sounds, the application that I actually do use computers for, and why I want all these cores, is editing video. So I want it for the rendering, and I also design stuff in SolidWorks. So I want to have as many cores as I can. So if I run a simulation, I know, that the thing I'm designing works or it doesn't work. TimeSpy does take its sweet time, but we want the number, right? I'm not wrong there, right? Maybe I should see what's going on YouTube. There's nobody actually sitting there watching me on YouTube right now, unless, of course, my son is upstairs on his computer killing my bandwidth. Nicholas, are you watching? Let's see. And it's going through this benchmark. That's the only thing about benchmarks, is they do take their sweet time. And this is, maybe next time what I'll do is I'll run TimeSpy first. But actually I should have had the little indicator up. See if I can do it without killing anything. Yes. Let's see. Come on, I want to run this little thing right here. Where's the metrics at? Where's my little metrics thing? Alright, TimeSpy is running. This is just for the GPU though, isn't it? I think this is just for the GPU. I'm probably going to get a crap score on TimeSpy now because I've been launching this thing instead of letting it go full screen. There is supposed to be a thing to measure it. Let's see what HW info says. Yeah, man. Dead stable. Actually, look. All these clocks are all over the place. All over the place. 35, 33, 36. So I am hitting that boost clock in spots. And so for gaming, this little Xeon is actually doing some work. Oh no. It says it was canceled. Ugh. How utterly disappointing. I might have to just bring this up after the fact, or maybe start the stream again after it actually runs the benchmark. But that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's how you overclock a locked Xeon. The next time I play around with the Xeon, I'm going to put it on the test bench. I'm going to run a different cooling system. I may even try this cooler that I have, which is a Peltier cooler that is like, hot pipe Peltier thing all in one, which I bought a very long time ago. I've been trying to get rid of it, but now it's been kind of cool to have it around so that I can use it for comparing whether or not it can actually cool stuff. I don't know. I just want to be able to boot to a much higher clock. 3.76 clock, boost clock is cool and all, but I want higher numbers. I want something phenomenal. That's why I'm going to order one of those dual socket X99 or X79 Chinese boards. See if I can have a ton of threads. So thank you if you took the time to watch this, and I hope you learned something about how to clock a locked Xeon. And I'll see you guys.